I'm going to talk about the topic of thinking, because this is something which I was taught, I feel, the wrong way from the time that I ordained. And it took me a long time to have the courage and the conviction to understand that the way that it is often taught in Vipassana circles to relate to thinking is not really the best way to develop the higher states or the deeper states of consciousness to which Buddhism aspires. What I had been told was you just allow thoughts to be there, but you don't attach to them. And so this is how I developed my meditation for many, many years. Now that teaching is correct insofar as we are practicing a practice of non-attachment. And non-attachment does not mean that you're not attached to your mortgage or feeding your children or obeying the law of the country. Non-attachment means that in the mind, when a perception arises, if you delight in it, one of the words for detachment is this word nandi, delighting. If you delight in the thought or the feeling, you will become attached. When you are attached, you hold on to it. When you hold on to it, your consciousness gets tied up in what's called bhava, or becoming, which means conscious engagement with that topic. So I can give you an example right now. In Thailand, there was a new government elected by the people, and the two senior parties, the two winning parties together hold 300 seats in a 500-seat parliament, so they have a majority. Unfortunately, the military appointed the Senate, and the Senate also gets a vote on who can become the government. So the Senate are currently blocking any attempt to form the government. This is what's happening in Thailand right now. So yesterday, the Constitutional Court banned the Prime Minister-elect from becoming the candidate to be Prime Minister. They banned him on two grounds. One is that he held some shares in a media company that went defunct like 10 years ago, hasn't done anything in this company, but they say, no, you're in a media company. And also on another grounds that he'd been nominated as Prime Minister and then didn't get the nomination because the Senate voted against him. So this is going on right now and is on the forefront of our minds, the minds of people in Thailand. As the military seems to try and wrest control away from the parties that were elected in the election. So this thought comes up in the mind, and it is tempting to think about it if you are involved in Thailand. If I get involved in it, what happens is I am delighting in it. The thought comes up and I like the thought. I want the thought. It may be positive or negative. I may be angry, want to get rid of the military government. I may be positive. Maybe I think the military would be a better government than the Democrats. But either way, that's delighting in. It means that I welcome the thought. I abide holding on to the thought, entertaining the thought. delighting in the thought. The Buddha would frequently use like 4, 5, or 6 words in this way to describe something. So then that is what results in attachment. And it's that attachment that has to be broken, not attachment in life. In life, of course, you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay your insurance, you have to feed your children, you have to feed the cat. So non-attachment in life doesn't really make sense. But in the mind, in the moment, as it arises right in front of you, that makes sense. That thought, we have the choice to attach onto it, to delight in it, or to let it go. So this is what the Buddha was teaching when something, a perception arises in the mind, or when a thought arises in perception, we do not abide holding on to it. We do not delight in it. We do not welcome it. We do not encourage it to stay. Now, so this is how I was taught. Well, we just allow thoughts to be there. And what I did for many years was exactly that. I would allow the thought just to be there in my mind, and it would bob along, thinking about this thing, but without any real attachment. I'm not going to welcome it or hold on to it, just allow it to be there, thinking away in the background. And I got comfortable with the meditation posture. And I found that I could sit for an hour, 2 hours, just allowing the mind to bob along in this way. But this is actually the wrong teaching. We do not abide attaching to the thought, but also we have to move beyond the thinking mind altogether. If you never step outside of the ordinary mind, you will never go beyond the ordinary mind. It sounds obvious when I put it that way, but not many people mention this. So there is a lot of Buddhism I've seen around where teachers say, allow thoughts to be there, allow them to be in the mind, don't be greedy, don't be hateful, downsize your life a little bit, live in a smaller house, make things more simple, don't get angry, and adopt a kind of Buddhist lifestyle. And in fact, I call this lifestyle Buddhism. But this is not what the Buddha was pointing at. Time after time after time, he said, bhikkhus, there are these roots of trees, there are these caves, there are these deserts. Go forth, meditate like your hair is on fire. Attain to those things that you have not yet attained to know those things you do not yet know. So this is pointing at something that lies far beyond the thinking mind. I want to be clear. When I talk about thinking today, I'm talking about the discursive mind. That is the mind that talks to you, says things. So I don't know how your mind works, but a lot of the time when I'm thinking, I'm actually thinking in conversations. I'm having conversations with somebody. Always in my mind, the other person is standing there quiet, listening to the fantastic things I have to say, bowed down in front of my superior wisdom and intellect. Is that how it works for you when you're thinking? You have a conversation, but it's all one way. It's all you telling the other person the way things are. So that is the discursive thinking, the mind that gets into the conversations. Personally, I can also think at inanimate objects. Like I can say, if I move the exhaust manifold of a British Leyland A series engine to the side and attach a 3-inch exhaust pipe and change the needle in the carburetor, I can make my car go faster. So I can think at inanimate objects also, but I'm still using the discursive mind. You can look around your house and say, I think I'm going to change those curtains. Those curtains have been up for too long. Maybe I should get blinds. Now, didn't somebody have blinds? I remember I saw some blinds. Some go across, some go up, and you're off, you're thinking, right? You've seen your blinds or your curtains, and you're off in conscious engagement with that topic. And you consciously engage by discursive thinking. Discursive comes from the word of discourse. So it means you have a conversation in your head. There is some question about, are other things also thinking? If I look at a sunset, am I thinking about the sunset, or am I just experiencing it? In my experience, I can experience something, but I can also think about that experience. So I get some really nice food. I get some cheese on toast. I had cheese on toast yesterday, and it was quite good. Now I can eat my cheese on toast silently in the mind, mindfully eating the cheese on toast. But I can also eat my cheese on toast with the thinking mind too. And if I think to myself, oh, that's good. I love cheese on toast. Oh, I tell you, I put pesto. I've just learned about pesto. So I put pesto on my cheese on toast. The pesto is good. I love the pesto. If I speak, if I have this discursiveness in the mind, it amplifies the experience that I'm having. You should try it. When you're experiencing something good, amplify it with the thinking. I first noticed this when I had been in Thailand for about 3 years, and I had my first hot shower. Now, I've never liked cold showers. I will never like cold showers, but there's not often I get a chance for a hot shower. And I went to a place and I had a hot shower. And so I thought, I'm really going to enjoy the hot shower. And I amplified it in my mind by saying to myself over and over, oh, this is good. I love a hot shower. This is so nice. It feels so good on my skin. The discursiveness, the words, they amplify the experience. In Buddhism, it's said that the function of thinking is to throw attention onto an object. So if I'm thinking about the shower in a discursive way, I'm throwing my attention upon the feeling of the shower, and I'm not thinking about an email I have to write or a place I have to go to, etc., etc. So the mind gets thrown upon an object by the action of thinking. And this is described as being like a bee that sees a flower in the distance. Having seen the flower, it zooms in towards the flower. As it gets to the flower, it circles around and around and around and stays very close to the flower so that it can land. So that was the function, 2 words in the Pali, vitakka and vichara. And vitakka is to throw the mind onto, like the bee going towards the flower. And vichara is to keep the mind hovering around the way you keep yourself hovering around a particular topic. So when we watch this process of thinking, of the discursive nature of thinking, the idea that we allow it to be there is actually incorrect. I did this for many years. I could sit for a long time. I could allow the thoughts to be there for a long time. And then when the meditation is over, I feel kind of drained, feel kind of tired. I don't feel like I've had good meditation. I do feel peaceful. And for many, many years, I mistook that peacefulness for the attainment of Dharma. I thought the Buddha talks about peace, and I'm experiencing peace after I sit there for an hour, letting the mind go dreaming around, and I come out of it and I'm kind of peaceful. This is a peacefulness that is built upon dullness. This is a peacefulness that is built upon distraction. The Buddha said, and I quote, the happiness that comes from, or the peace that comes from the distracted mind is not to be sought after. The peace that comes from a concentrated mind, that is to be sought after. I can find you the exact quote if you like. So it took some time before I really was able to realize that if I'm going to be meditating, I can't be thinking. That kind of meditation, thinking, leads to dullness and a kind of oozy, woozy, uninspiring kind of peacefulness that is born from non-engagement with the world around. So the insights that one is supposed to get by looking at thinking. As thinking occurs, you're supposed to observe the impermanence of it. When you observe the impermanence of it, you attain to, or you have the insight of, dukkha. When you understand or observe the dukkha of thinking, you attain to non-self. That's what the Buddha said, directly, quote. So the impermanence of thinking, you hear a thought come up, it rattles around your head for a while, it tries to grab your attention. And if you don't follow it, if you don't delight in it, that thought dissipates. When the thought dissipates, you can stop and reflect, was that thought really so important? When I think about the shenanigans in the Thai parliament right now, it's important to Thailand, it's important to the country, it's important if you work in politics. But for me right now, sitting on my meditation mat, trying to do my meditation, is it important? If I watch that thought dissipate, I'm left with this kind of empty feeling. Where is the thought gone? Where is the feeling of wanting to think it, the attachment? So, insight into the impermanent nature of thinking exposes the dukkha of the thought. It's dukkha because it absorbs your energy, it absorbs your attention, it distracts you from any other thing that you could be doing. And there's a heaviness to thinking that can only be understood if you have stood in the non-thinking mind. And for most people, ordinary people of the world who have not done meditation, the non-thinking of the mind is not something that they will have ever experienced. Or if they have experienced it, they haven't developed it. They haven't experienced it deliberately. Only a meditator will start to develop these states. So observing the impermanence of the thinking, seeing it arise and disappear, you see the heaviness or the dukkha of it, the intransience of it. The dukkha means to shake, like a wheel that isn't centered properly and it kind of shakes on its axle. Observing this dukkha, this shakiness, this uneasiness of thinking gives rise to the sense of non-self, anatta. And it shows you anatta because you get this insight. Well, if this thought is unpleasant, I can experience it, but when it disappears, that unpleasantness is gone. I don't say I have disappeared, I say the thought has disappeared. So you get the sense of yourself being there, independent of the thinking mind. This is very crucial and something that I wasn't taught clearly in my early years. The sense of presence, and yes, the sense of self, you can say, that arises independent of the things that are happening in the mind. Most people don't get to experience this because you're always focused, you're always wrapped up in the movement of the mind or the objects of the thinking. You have to be able to step outside of the thinking mind to truly get the insight that you are not the thinking mind. There is no alternative. So being able to, these insights arise, these three insights, one by one. Insight into the impermanence of the mind shows you dukkha. Insight into the dukkha of the mind starts to show you non-self. We can raise this up in question time if you want, but I just want to point out briefly that non-self applies to the things of the mind, the thoughts that you can think, the perceptions that you can have on your body, in your nerves, in your ears, in your eye, in your nose, in your tongue. These are non-self. At no point did the Buddha say there is no self, or that you can meditate there and the self just disappears and you melt like a drop of rain in the ocean. No, he never said anything like this. Even though many Buddhists do speak in that way, that's not what was taught. Non-self applies to the objects of the sense, something that you can see, something you can hear, something you can taste, something you can feel, something you can smell, and a thought that you can think. All of those are impermanent, suffering, and not self. So you get a sense of yourself, for want of a better word, or I could use the word awareness, or sometimes we use the word the witness. This comes from the Thai, they call puru. Pu is the person and the ru is knowing. So is the one who knows. The attention is supposed to come back, not to the thing that is known, but to the one who knows. This sense of yourself, by the way, will be grounded in the body. You will see the body, but see with awareness. If you want to know more about that, Ajahn Vimok was talking in the Metta Center last week or the week before, and he's talking about this. I know Ajahn Vimok can be difficult to understand sometimes, but trust me, he really, really knows what he's talking about. And I don't say that about too many people. So there is a sutta that I want to look at today. It is a well-known sutta called the Dvedhāvitakkasutta. You may well have heard of it before. And it's an interesting sutta in which the Buddha describes that he had the experience of two different kinds of thinking. And he had the insight that both kinds of thinking have to be given up. By the way, just before we get onto the sutta, I want to mention Abhidhamma Sangaha, which also mentions two kinds of thinking. A very important distinction it makes. One is directed thinking, sasankarikang, and the other is undirected thinking, sasankarikang. Directed thinking is where you know what you are thinking about, and you are thinking about it. For example, I'm thinking about who will become Thailand's next prime minister. Will the military still manage to get control again, even though they got utterly demolished at the last election? I know what I'm thinking about. I know the topic. It's absorbing. It's interesting. But undirected thinking is where you are not clearly directing the topic of thought. So the mind bobs along from one thing to another thing, to another thing, to another thing. For example, I think to myself, I'd like a cup of coffee. Do I have enough coffee? Hey, didn't somebody give me some bags of coffee? I've got coffee beans. I should grind up coffee beans. I never grind up coffee beans anymore. I'm going to find my grinder. Where is my grinder? I think my friend Jun, he gave me my grinder. How is Jun right now? I haven't seen Jun for a long time. Didn't his wife have COVID? Yeah, I should check on him with COVID. I had COVID myself, wasn't too bad. And you see, you just go from topic to topic to topic to topic without any real story in which to get attached to. This is, in fact, a kind of dreaming. So you're daydreaming. And this was how, for many years, I interpreted the teaching, allow thoughts to be there and don't get attached. I would sink into this kind of undirected thinking where the mind just bobs along from one thing to another thing, to another thing, to another thing, without any real attachment or interest. So these are two different kinds of thinking that we can experience. The bobbing along undirected thinking is to be avoided at all costs. There is no profit. There is no merit to engaging in that kind of mind. Unless you're sat on a bus or an airplane and there's nothing else to do, then let your mind go into that kind of thinking. So whenever the Buddha talks about thinking or objects of perception, he's talking about this directed, mindful, clear, bright, aware kind of awareness. In the Dvedhāvitakkasutta, I am going to just give a thumbs up if you can see the sutta on the screen. Okay, good. So in this sutta, go back to the beginning, the Buddha says that he's talking about before my awakening. Awakening is this word, sambodhi, sambodhiyana, and bodhi or sambodhi is one of the many words that the Buddha used for enlightenment. So you can see here, by the way, sambodha is the word that's being used. This is where we get the term bodhi from, in Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. So bodhi or bodha is the translated as awakening, and it means enlightenment. He said, when I was not yet awakened, I thought to myself, what if I were to divide my thinking into two different classes? In one class, I thought I will list sensual thoughts, gama vitakka. Gama means sense desire. Malicious thoughts, which is paya vitakka. Paya vitakka. I'm using Thai pronunciation, baya vitakka. And cruel thoughts, hingsa vitakka. So what are the opposites to these kinds of thinking? Now, some of you who might be well-known in Buddhism might recognize that this is the definition of samma sankappo, or right intention, in the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path, samma ditti, right view, samma sankappa, right intention. The definition of right intention in Buddhism is right here, is the opposite of those three kinds of wrong thoughts: sense desire thoughts, malicious thoughts, and cruel or violent thoughts. So the opposite of these, opposite of sense desire, is nekamma, renunciation. So thoughts of renunciation. The opposite of malicious, Bhante Sujata has translated here goodwill, but if you look at the Pali, it actually just says non-malicious thinking. And harmlessness, which is avihingsa vitakka. Remember, vitakka is to throw the mind onto something by thinking. Now you might notice this word harmlessness in the Pali is avihingsa, but in the Sanskrit it is ahimsa, which, if you remember, is the word that Gandhi used in his efforts to expel the British from India. He used ahimsa, right? Non-violence. So this is the same word. So here the Buddha says there are two kinds of thinking: the sense desire, malicious and violent; renunciation, non-malicious and non-violent on the other side. Renunciation, non-malicious, non-violent is the definition of right intention, which is the second part of the Eightfold Path. So he realized if he has any of the wrong kinds of thinking, he says, it hurts me, it hurts others, it hurts myself and others, it blocks wisdom, it causes anguish, and it doesn't lead to nibbana. Here, Bhante has used the word extinguishment, but the word in the Pali is nibbana, or at nibbana, non-nibbana. Because he understood that the wrong kinds of thinking are harmful to himself and others, block wisdom, and don't lead to enlightenment, he abandoned that thought. In Bhante Sujata's translation, he says, it went away. It means he gave up, abandoned, relinquished that line of thinking. Then he reflected, what about the good thoughts? Well, so if a greedy thought arises, a malicious thought arises, or a harmful thought arises, he realizes the nature of that thought and he would make it go away. He would abandon it and relinquish it. So then he also said, well, what about the good thoughts? What about the nekamma, non-harmfulness and non-violence? So he says, I'm trying to find the part of the sutta, so I'll rely on my memory. Then he says that if he was to think these thoughts, these good thoughts, all day and all night, that would be blameless, but it would make the mind tired. And when the mind is tired, it doesn't concentrate. And when I can't practice concentration, it doesn't lead to wisdom and nibbana. Therefore, he says, I gave up the good thoughts too. He gave an analogy here in the next section of the sutta. I'll put a link to the sutta in the chat so you can check if what I'm saying is correct by yourself. He gives an analogy. Think about the cowherd who looks after the cows. In the rainy season, he must be very careful where the cows wander. This is the boy. You can call a cowboy, but it was like a shepherd. So as soon as the cows start to wander away from their designated area, he has to jump on them, poke them with a stick and control them. Otherwise, they will damage people's crops and people will be angry at him. That is like the mind engaged in the wrong kind of thinking. Then imagine the same cowherd with his cows in the dry season. There aren't any crops. He can allow the cows to wander about without too much worry about them doing harm. That is like the good thoughts in the mind. You can allow them to be there. However, you still will not attain to concentration. So he says, from those good thoughts, if I was to think them all night and all day, I see no danger that would come from those thoughts. However, thinking those thoughts for too long would tire my body. When the body is tired, the mind is stressed and tired. When the mind is stressed or tired, it is far from immersion. Bhante Sujato has used the word immersion, but the word is samadhi, concentration. You can highlight in the Pali there. Therefore, he says, and this is the crucial part, which I'm going to finish tonight's talk on. Therefore, seeing the danger in both the good thoughts and the bad thoughts, I stilled, settled, unified, and concentrated my mind internally. I stilled, settled, unified, and immersed my mind internally. So I meditated, keen, diligent, with resolution. Every time a thought arose in me, I understood this is a thought that has arisen in me, and I abandoned it. My energy was thus aroused, unflagging, my mindfulness established and lucid, my body tranquil and undisturbed, and my mind was immersed in samadhi. So he's clearly saying that all kinds of thinking have to stop in order for one to pass on to the higher states of mind. Notice here, he says that when his energy was roused up, unflagging, it means relentless. My mindfulness established and lucid. I really like this word, lucid. My body was tranquil, and this is something that one experiences as you attain to jhanas or deep meditation. The body starts to suddenly feel very comfortable. There may still be aches and pains in the body, and if you pay attention to your back or your knee, you will still find your familiar ache or pain there. But the attention comes in and you get a body awareness, like a full body awareness, that isn't specific to any particular part of the body. It's a kind of vibration, a tingling. The body becomes very comfortable to be in. Note when that happens. Whatever meditation object you are using at that time, concentration on the breath or mantra or anything else, drop your meditation object and come to this comfortable, tranquilized feeling within the body. It says tranquil here, but I want to emphasize that it is lucid, is bright, is vibrant, is very clear. You can definitely feel that the mind is present and concentrated. It's not tranquil as in the mind's just bobbing along in a dream state. So then the Buddha carries on to the end of the sutta. he says, when I had attained to this, I entered into the first jhana, second jhana, third, fourth jhana, and practiced his concentration meditation. When he'd done this, his mind became bright, purified, flawless, rid of corruptions, pliable, workable, steady, imperturbable, which means it doesn't shake. So again, note, this is not feeling peaceful. This isn't allowing thoughts to be there in the mind. This is very much the opposite. When you've stepped outside of the thinking mind altogether, then these experiences start to arise. He says he turned his attention to past lives in the first watch of the night. In the second watch of the night, he had turned his mind towards the arising and passing away of sentient beings in heavens and hells. This was the second insight of the night of enlightenment. On the third watch of the night of enlightenment, he turned his attention, turned his mind to the attainment of the end of the defilement. Defilement is asava, which means the outflowing of the mind. When the mind stops flowing outside of itself, that is the end of the outflowings, and again is a definition of enlightenment. And he says, at that point I understood, rebirth is ended, my spiritual journey is completed, I've done what I had to do, and now there is no more returning to the world of people. So I'm going to put the sutta into the chat, and then you can see it for yourself if you want to look it up afterwards. I do rely on the suttas directly because I want you to know that this isn't, there we go, it's in the chat. One of my bugbears is a lot of teachers who talk about Buddhism, and when I listen to them, I find it's not actually Buddhism they're talking about. They have a lot of kind of pseudo-Buddhist ideas. A friend of mine tried to open up a Dharma center near my temple, and he gave this introduction to Buddhism talk. So I went along and listened to it, and it was Ken Wilber. He'd read a book from Ken Wilber, the philosopher, and so he just talked about what he'd read in this Ken Wilber book. It had nothing to do with Buddhism. So I have a bit of a thing about Buddhist teachers, or when they're teaching something that doesn't align with what we know about in the suttas. So I want to stop there. I just looked at my clock. I've been talking for 45 minutes. In summary, the thinking mind, you have two kinds of thinking, directed and undirected thinking. Undirected thinking is like a dream state where the mind bobs along from topic to topic, and you just allow the thoughts to be there. It's like being on an airplane or in a motor car as a passenger, and the mind just doesn't do anything in particular. The second form of thinking is directed, which means you know what you are thinking about. There's a topic that has come up and you want to think about it. The thinking holds your attention onto that topic of thought. In meditation, we're really only interested in the second kind, directed thinking. Of directed thinking, there are two kinds, the good kind and the bad kind. The good thoughts, the bad thoughts of sense desire, hatred, and violence, and the good thoughts of renunciation, non-hatred, and non-violence. Both kinds of thinking have to be given up. Then one starts to attain to some of these states of unremitting mindfulness, of pristine awareness, of brightness in the mind, lucid feeling in the mind, tranquility of the body. And then one starts to attain to jhanas, concentration, but also just interesting states of being that start to afford insights that you can't have any other way. The only way to get the insight that you are not your thinking is to stop the thinking in the mind and be aware. And then you feel directly for yourself, without thought, there is a presence, a consciousness here that is independent of the things I can be conscious of. It's not seeing or smelling or tasting or hearing, but there is a knower or a witness behind all these experiences. So in one word, stop thinking. Don't fall into the mistake that I had of allowing thoughts to be there. That teaching of allowing thoughts to be there means that if you start fighting your thinking, no, I mustn't think this thing, I don't want to think that thing, well, that's another thought. And you're doing what's called beating down thought with thought. You're fighting against yourself. So that's why we have this teaching of allowing things to be there. However, you have to step beyond the thinking mind in your meditation. If anybody has any questions or feedback, you can speak up now, or you can also type it into the chat.
Bhante, isn't it like to stop that thinking, you still have to go through that process of like you watch that thoughts and let it subside before you can come to the stop thinking stage, isn't it?
Yes, exactly, because we are thinking animals, we're always thinking. So the easiest, best, and most assured way is to watch the ending of a thought. As you watch the ending of thoughts, of a thought, you can hook into that space in between the thoughts. So that's the most effective way to actually hook into this kind of awareness that lies beyond the thinking mind.
Anyone else has any questions? Or yes, Joseph, how are you?
Hi, Joe. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Janya. I wanted to ask one thing I've never really understood is the idea that sense desires are something bad. I could see if it was a sense desire that was harmful or destructive, but if you enjoy your cheese toast, or I say, oh, these cherries in the market look good, I hope that they're sweet, I don't see what the problem is with that. Or I'd like to take a hot shower now, or it's too hot in this room, I think I'll turn on the aircon. What's the problem with that?
There's no problem. If you want to live your life in that way, then why not? Even if one is a hardcore dedicated monk, we still enjoy things. I still enjoy my cheese toasty or my hot shower. So I do still enjoy these things. But when the mind, a perception arises in the mind and it attaches to that perception, you are not meditating and you are not attaining to these super mundane states that the Buddha talked about. The only way to find these states that the Buddha talked about is to withdraw the mind from the sensory experience. Then these states of unremitting mindfulness, lucidity, the tranquility of the body, the equipoise of the mind, these states start to arise because they're behind sensory experience. If you don't step out of sensory experience, you will never know anything except sensory experience.
But while you're eating your cheese toast, you can enjoy your cheese toast.
I would, and I do. I mean, of course, I don't actually. I eat it mindfully and with complete dispassion. But that's the thing, you can't do these practices with the ego. So if the ego says, I'm never going to have any kind of experience, I don't need anything, yeah, you're going to fail badly. And I tell you, I've seen so many monks come into the monastery, so many people come in and ordain as monks, and they have this view. I was one myself, like, I'm going to be tough and I'm not going to want anything and I'm not going to enjoy anything. And I guarantee that those people, they're not going to last. You have to find joy in the world around you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hi, Bill.
Can I talk, Maria?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, in the last 18 months, I've lost 2 very close lifelong friends. And I find during my meditation, not so much now, but in the past, I've been in my meditation, my mind always keeps going back to them, those 2 people. And it's very frustrating for me. I know that I'm going off my point of focus, and I pat myself on the back and say, yes, I recognise I've lost my point of focus, and I've come back to it. But I keep going back to it, and I get so frustrated. I just give it up. Should I battle on with my meditation in times like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Always keep going with the meditation for the rest of this life and the next life and several more lifetimes to come. Once you've started, really, you're never going to be able to stop. But there are those frustrating times when you just can't get your mind off a topic, but you can designate periods of time, like this is the time that I have for thinking about that, and this is the time I have for not thinking about that. Another really good practice that I found is called riding out a thought. So when a particular thought comes up, you say, right, come here. I'm going to watch you. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to feel you. I'm going to feel this thought. I'm going to feel the lure that's trying to pull me into this thought. And I'm going to watch it all the way until it vanishes. And I'm going to stay there watching. And I'm going to watch the empty space that arises when that thought's gone, even if it only goes for half a second or a minute. And when you ride out a thought, it gives you so much confidence. That thought actually cannot overpower me.
Okay.
But this is a lifelong practice. I'll tell you a little true story of what I used to do, and I'm not recommending that you do this. But I'd have thoughts come up, and I would sit to meditate, and within like a second, my mind's gone. And then 20 minutes later, I'll be like, I'm meditating, and then a second later, it's gone. And this went on for years. And I got so frustrated, I started hitting myself across the face. I'm like, 10 years as a monk, and this is all you've got. Come on, is this the best you can do? People come and make offerings to the temple, and you're supposed to represent Buddhism. Because I was so frustrated that I couldn't just stop this thing. Now, the thought that I was frustrated with at that time was this undirected thinking, because I would close my eyes, go into meditation, and my mind would just lapse straight into this dream state. In your case, you have a particular topic that's coming up to you. You just have to keep going. Sooner or later, the correct insights will arise.
I'm finding that already, but
yeah, if you keep knocking on the door,
Yeah.
That thing in the Bible, if you knock and on the door, God will answer, something like that. If you keep like looking for the way out of it, if you keep getting the insight into the suffering of the nature of that compulsive thinking, eventually you work your way out of it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I remember about 8-9 years ago, there was a female Thai Prime Minister, Ying Lak, and I quite liked her. I thought she did a very good job and was quite sincere. And then when the military came and ousted her from power, from the government, I felt bad. And at that time, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I'd sit and meditate, this politics would come up in my mind. Anyway, the military took total, complete and utter control, and there's nothing you can do. And then I found after a few weeks after that, I just stopped thinking about it. Now the same process is going on again. The military, well, the conservative forces trying to get control. I don't know what Joe thinks, whether the military is going to succeed in regaining control of Parliament, but this time round, I'm not really even thinking about it. I check the news once a day. The compulsive power of thinking is just one of the most key insights that you can have. I can mention fairy tales. You know, I love fairy tales. So in Rumpelstiltskin, if you remember, he would spin the straw into gold, and the farmer's daughter was told that she had to spin straw into gold, otherwise she would be killed. And so every night Rumpelstiltskin came down and spun the straw into gold for her. And then spinning in fairy tales is a metaphor for thinking. You can feel it like the mind spinning around, right? But also when people would spin cloth, there would always be chit-chatting and talking. So if you might know the saying in English and Australian, spinning yarns. So spinning a yarn actually means a yarn, a piece of cloth. So the spinning of Rumpelstiltskin was a metaphor for the thinking mind. And there was a messenger who had been told to find out the name of Rumpelstiltskin. If we know Rumpelstiltskin's name, then he loses his power. And the messenger who found out Rumpelstiltskin's name went out through the forest, past the place where the fox and the hare go to sleep. Now the hare is like a rabbit hair, not a hair on the head. In Christian mythology, the fox represented the thinking mind or the intellect, and the hare represents the mad mind or the imagination. So in Christian mysticism, two parts of the mind, the intellect and the imagination, and these two work together all the time. So the messenger who found out the name of Rumpelstiltskin had to go past the place where both the hare and the fox go to sleep, which is a metaphor for going out past the mind, past the intellect and the imagination of the mind, and then into the forest. And if you remember, he sees a little cottage, which represents your true self. And outside the cottage is a fire. And Rumpelstiltskin is hopping over the fire, dancing, saying, aha, they will never know that my name is Rumpelstiltskin. So this is a metaphor for knowing when you see the nature of the mind itself. That's knowing the name. When you know something's name, you have the power over it in fairy tales. So when you see the nature of the mind, then it ceases to have power over you. Poor Rumpelstiltskin got swallowed up into the ground. Fairy tales are quite brutal. Did you see this new remake of Snow White that they're making? They've wokeified Snow White. And rather than being white, now she's a Latino. And rather than 7 dwarfs, now you're having 7 different people of different nationalities and sexualities. And oh man, it's so dumb. They just don't understand the meaning of the story.
Bhante, about what Bill was saying, that if your thought is like too actively, or your mind is too actively attached to one thought, I think I remember one of your last talk or something, we were talking about instead of resisting it, like to divert it to another things, like or another thought, or to so that you don't kind of activate this thought any further, like feeding, putting the oil into the fire and make this thought grow bigger. So is there another way that we can just either divert it to another method so that to make the thought subside?
So in the sutta that I gave reference to, the Dvedhāvitakkasutta is sutta number 19 in the Majjhima Nikaya. The next sutta, sutta number 20, is called the 5 ways to control distracting thoughts. So I won't go through it all here, but you can look it up for yourself. So the link that I gave you was sutta number 19. You can look up on the website sutta number 20. You just click the little arrow and you come to the next sutta. So in it, the Buddha does say that if you have distracting thoughts, you can employ methods to control the mind or control distracting thoughts. So one way, if the thought is a harmful thought in some way, try to have a nice thought instead. So if I'm thinking about how much I want to beat the heads of the people who are trying to keep power in the government, I can change my hateful, angry thought into a metta, a loving kindness thought. So you can take one thought that is more pure and knock out the impure thought. So you're using one thought to replace another. That was one way. Another way, he said, was to just slow the thinking down until it stops.
Mm-hmm.
There was another way. You can look up the sutta. He had 5 different ways. I would add a 6th way, though, that he doesn't mention in the sutta, that if thoughts just you really just have that thought that just won't stop and it's banging away at you, sometimes you just have to go to bed.
Mm.
Just go and give up for a day. Don't worry, tomorrow there'll be another day. So many a time I've just given up and like, okay, I'm just gonna, the thought has beaten me today. But it won't beat you forever.
Yeah.
But I want to emphasize that this plan of beating the mind with the mind is not a good plan long term. Our goal as a meditator is not to build up like one side of our ego that beats down the other side of our ego. Long term, that's not going to be a good plan. You have to step outside of the thinking mind altogether. There, the mind is naturally pristine, it's naturally bright and aware. Insights will naturally afford themselves to you from that standpoint. So ultimately, that's the only way to do it. You can't do it by beating the mind down with the mind. You may know in mythology, you often have stories where 2 equal people fight each other. I think Cain and Abel might be one. There's a whole number of them in the Bible where two equals fight with each other, but the most well-known example is the siege of Troy, and you have Achilles, and who is the Greek, if I'm right. Achilles is the Greek warrior, the champion, and Hector is the Troy champion. And Achilles and Hector go out and fight each other day after day after day, and neither one of them can get advantage over the other. Now, Achilles is cheating because his mother dangled him in the river Styx, and the river Styx separates our world from the underworld. And anybody who has been touched by the water of the river Styx, that part of their body becomes indestructible. So Achilles' mother had taken him to the river Styx, held him by the heel and dipped him in the water so that Achilles is actually indestructible, except where his mother had hold of his foot. That didn't go in the river Styx. And that was the only part of Achilles that was vulnerable. So every day Hector and Achilles would come and fight. These are two equals that cannot best each other. So neither of them are ever going to win. But when they found out that Achilles, his heel wasn't indestructible, they could shoot an arrow into his heel and kill him. So that's where we get the saying Achilles' heel, which means your vulnerability comes from this story of Achilles. Now, the motif of two equals fighting each other, neither able to gain control over the other one, is a metaphor for the mind fighting the mind. Because it is you yourself that you are fighting, and you can't get stronger than you. Whatever one side of your ego tries to wrest control, the other side just gets stronger. It's your mind fighting against your mind, and you're never going to win until you find the Achilles heel. You find the clever way out of the battle altogether. So you often find in mythology this motif of two equals fighting each other. X-Men had the same. You had, was it Magneto? This is from Meredith. You usually know these crazy movies. You know, you watch Transformer movies. I think X-Men, you had Magneto and you had the one played by Patrick Stewart. So you always have this kind of thing of two equals fighting each other. This is a metaphor for the mind fighting the mind. It's never going to end well when you are pitching the mind against the mind. You have to find a way out of it, out of the battle.
Bhante has a lot of fairy tale story that can relate to Dharma very easily, effortlessly. I got to know about Monkey King's story and Alice in the Wonderlands so differently when I attended the retreat by Bhante Pandit in Vejasala a few years ago. That was the first time I heard Dharma through the fairy tales.
Which fairy tale did we do? Can you remember?
You do the Monkey King one, and then
Okay.
the Alice in the Wonderland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do another fairy tale next time. I have some really beautiful ones that are just like so poignant. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the sausage from the nose in one of your talk.
Yeah.
That's classic too. So for that, let's put our palm together, and can Bhante give us a blessing to end the night?
Sabitiyo avivajantu sambharogo vinasatu mate bhavat vantarayo sukhiti kayuko bhava abhivadanasi lisani changvota pachayino chataro dhamma vadanti ayu vano sukhang balang.
Sadhu,
Okay.
sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all. Good night.
Thank you.